I want to welcome all of you. My name's David Silberman. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Clinical Research Fastrack. Clinical Research Fastrack is celebrating our 10th year of helping people enter and advance in the field of clinical research. We're an organization that trains people and supports them as they get their first jobs in clinical research. We also train for sites and CROs and sponsors, their staff. They send them their staff to us to help them get the skills and training, the foundational core competencies they need to succeed. We train principal investigators, and we've been doing this now for a long time. And it is my great honor today to have the opportunity to talk about breaking in to clinical research and exploring career paths and industry roles with our special guest, Jeannie Farnsworth. Jeannie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. As you know, I'm very passionate about clinical research, but Clinical Research Fastrack is near and dear to my heart. I met you, David, 9 years ago and got to be part of the instructor team for a little stint as a director out of Scottsdale, Arizona. I drove by there the other day, everything looks so different out there now. And so I hope that whoever is watching, listening, ask your questions, ask deep down inside if this is something for you. This is informational only, right? You're not committed and obligated to anything. This is for you to learn about what it is and if it fits into your life or if you want more. And then David can answer your questions. So I have had a really great career within clinical research for 25 years. I've worked in a lot of different therapeutic areas at a lot of different disciplines, meaning different sites, different CROs and sponsors. I've worked in the public sector, the private sector. I've worked within the United States and I've worked internationally, which is a very cool thing to do, but it requires a different skill set. I've worked in regulatory, in quality, and like I mentioned before, I've also been in education and training, which I still currently do in all of my roles. So I hope that this will be helpful for you as you explore your options and think about where your career will take you based on what you have right now in your toolkit.
Wow. And Jeannie, you have been working in this field for 25 years. That's a long time. And you look younger than ever. So I don't know what your secret is. Maybe whatever the skincare products you use have been through the clinical trials and they are FDA approved. But you look fantastic. And thank you for being with us today. It's such an honor to be able to work with you over these years. Jeannie had a stint with us where she was the director of our programs. We got to work very closely together. And after leaving, she's been at CROs. She has been in multiple roles. And we're going to talk about some of those roles today. But just to start, yes, Jeannie, I want to start right at the beginning because we get a lot of calls from people who say, yeah, I'd love to work in research and I have lab experience. And can we clarify for everyone exactly what is clinical research? What are we talking about? How does it differ from lab research or academic research? What is this field of clinical research?
So clinical research in a nutshell is looking at the treatments, whether it's a medication, usually not over the counter. Over the counter typically are not as well researched out, especially in the supplements, right? So I'm talking about devices that are FDA approved, and I'm looking at medications that require FDA approval. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm keeping it to the United States, and I will refer to the FDA. Outside of the US, there are other regulations that I won't touch on because that does require a different skill set. But it is studying how a compound or a device works so that it improves human health. It might be to improve upon a current existing medication or device. It might be to introduce something absolutely brand new. Improvement in human health means to better it, whether it's to lengthen someone's life or it's to improve upon it by giving them better quality of life. So it may be that someone has a cancer diagnosis and they may not have much time left, but the time that's remaining, we're able to give them a better quality. That's in a nutshell. We're working with human beings. We are gathering data from them based on these protocols, and then we analyze them. In the lab, it's taking the specimens from those participants. There's a lot of data, so we kind of talk about data and patients back and forth within clinical research. Thank you for sharing the slides. So having that perspective of understanding the safety and the efficacy, and most importantly, does it work, right? So that's kind of the efficacy. Um, and is it better than what exists out there? Sometimes you really want to spend a lot of time, money, effort into something that is the same as what currently exists. Does that
Beautiful. And
answer
just to and to
question?
distinguish one more fact, and you mentioned this, but I just want to emphasize it. We are testing these drugs, therapies, devices in humans. So this is the last stage. It's after the laboratory testing, after any animal testing, and then we're moving into sometimes first in human, and then at the phase 2 and 3, larger groups of people to make sure that this is going to be something that doctors can prescribe. Um, is that, Jeannie, you've worked in this field for a long time. Does that make it really more scary, higher regulated? What does that mean? We're working with people.
So the risk is because we are working with human beings. It's not just animal models. And something that we're seeing a lot is kind of a replacement using AI machine learning instead of animal models. And we're using AI machine learning to improve human health outcomes. But working with humans, it's very important to understand that different ethnicities matter. And so we need diversity. I know that's a bad word these days, but I'll use it. And so we're working with patients to see how this affects them. So not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively. But most of the data will be collected quantitatively.
Okay, now we know what clinical research is, and some people think they need to have a PhD to do this. Let's dive into the types of roles that are in the field. And I'm going to share this slide with everyone because there's different areas where people work in clinical research, and we're going to break it down very simply. To start, we're going to talk a little bit about some patient-facing roles. We're going to talk about behind-the-scenes roles, and then we're going to talk about the organizations, the site sponsor, CRO, the vendors, and even the IRB, where people are working. So let's just dive in, Jeannie, and let's talk about site level roles. And we're going to start with clinical research coordinator. First of all, have you worked as a clinical research coordinator before?
Absolutely. And I will always say that if you have the opportunity to work as a CRC, and in some institutions, they want to start you out as a research assistant before rolling you into a clinical research coordinator. These are people who are directly interacting with the participants. We call them participants instead of patients because they are technically not clinical patients who are coming in for standard of care. Within research, we're exploring something new. It's a new process and you can opt out. Whereas standard of care, you don't really have as much say. As a research assistant and coordinator, you are consenting, you are performing assessments, collecting questionnaires. You're working with the investigator, who's usually a physician, a nurse practitioner, a PA, a DO who is performing medical assessments for that protocol. But you're kind of the ringmaster of all of these assessments, and you communicate with the patients, working with the staff, and then you're working with the sponsor of the protocol if it's a sponsored trial, and communicating all that has to happen to collect the data from the participants to then allow them to analyze the data.
Wow, that's a lot, Jeannie. So the clinical
Well,
research coordinator is conducting all of those tasks from enrolling the participants in the trial, explaining the consenting process, all the way through collecting data, entering data. That's
entering
that's a
data.
lot.
Yep, yep.
And you probably need to
Cleaning data.
know a lot to do that job.
Uh, yes. I mean, yes and no. It's a lot of it you learn on the job because intuitively it does make sense. You collect a piece of information from someone, you have to enter it so that others are aware of that information. And then you might have like someone from the industry, like a CRA, who will check your data, and you may have to clean it because it maybe wasn't as clear as was expected. Some sites may do their own analysis on their own data set within their site. Most sites do not, but a lot of them may participate in a bigger data set. Um, What else did I miss in there? Oftentimes the CRC also works in the regulatory space. And so what that means is understanding all of the rules and the regulations that are required to be compliant because we are working with human beings and their health. So I love that you put this up there. Regulatory specialists can be separated out from the CRC. Sometimes they can be the same person. So it all depends on the site. And then David also has this recruitment specialist. I started my career out where I did everything. So I did screening where I'm looking for eligible patients to recruit into the study. So I worked as kind of the recruitment specialist. And then I was the CRC, seeing all the patients, gathering all the data. But then I had that regulatory hat, understanding the regulatory documents that needed to be submitted and filed with the IRB, within the sponsor, within our own institution, making sure that we were following our own SOPs. Let's
Oh my
see.
God.
Oftentimes there's, yes,
Lots and
go
lots
ahead.
of roles. Let's keep going. Now at the site level, we have site supervisors. What is the site supervisor doing?
So that's typically like a manager at the site who's going to oversee a team or at least oversee one other person to make sure that everything's operating smoothly. So typically this person has more experience than any single one of these positions.
Excellent. There's other positions like a lab coordinator, phlebotomist at a site. What would they be doing?
It could be lots of different specimens as long as it comes from a human being. It could be urine, feces. And so they can be collecting and then they process it and then they will ship it out to where it needs to go, unless it's investigator initiated and they're performing their own labs. But that typically, there's a lot to be done in that space. Centrifuging is part of the processing. Sometimes you use the fridge, sometimes you're using the freezer, you're aliquoting. So a lot of, if we have any lab researchers, there's kind of those elements involved with being a lab coordinator involved with clinical research.
Fantastic. And thank you all for the questions. We're going to be going through a little more information, answering some of your questions along the way, and then we will get to many of your questions. Okay, what we've been talking about up into this point are site level positions. There's another site level position that I want to share with everyone, which is principal investigator. Jeannie, can you explain what the principal investigator is? We talked about the coordinator, regulatory, supervisor, lab. There's also a principal investigator. Who is a principal investigator?
So it's typically someone who has medical credentials, like I mentioned earlier, who is a physician, who is an MD or DO. It could be a nurse practitioner or a PA who has supervisory skills, and they oversee the clinical assessments. Now they can delegate everything on that trial except for oversight and responsibility of that trial. So they should personally oversee that this protocol or this clinical trial is being performed according as it's written. And so this is someone who could be over one site or many sites, and they sometimes can be a site supervisor because they are overseeing all of the staff. Typically, they are well paid because they're using their medical degree, but they also have to follow all of the clinical research training, such as GCP and human subjects research protections training. And so they have to be able to understand how it all works in a clinical research space, not a clinical space.
Yeah, and those principal investigators, they are in charge of the trial. We do have people, sometimes they have a PhD, or we hear from people who are international medical doctors, and they're like, can I be a principal investigator? And the answer is usually the principal investigator needs to be a board certified physician with expertise in that specific area. So I don't want to say never, but normally, if you are an international medical doctor and you don't have the certification and licensure and residency here, you're more likely to be in other roles in clinical research. And we do have so many international doctors who have come through our program and are working, for example, as coordinators or CRAs or other behind the scenes roles. I know someone asked about, can you share more about the behind the scenes roles? And I'm going to share our slides, and I'm going to put up two roles right off the bat. And Jeannie, can you talk about these two roles? One's called a CTA and one's a CRA. What does this all mean?
So I like to equate it to kind of the research assistant and the CRC. And so the CTA kind of does a lot of the upfront work to prepare everything for the CRA. Some institutions separate this differently, but I'm going to use the most common model where CTAs are prepping all of the behind the scenes. Whereas CRAs, so they can be remotely based, they can be centrally based. When they're remotely based, they have a whole task list that they have to get through. Their main job is to ensure that the data makes sense, that the data is true, it has the integrity that we expect. So they are often kind of the data cleaners. And they're interacting with the sites, typically with the CRCs, because they're the ones who enter the data, unless there's a data person at the site who has entered it. And so the CTAs will support maybe the daily things. The CRAs may be performing kind of the higher level things. Very often they are working together. In some models, they are not working together, and maybe CTAs are more focused on the regulatory. This is kind of a mixed bag because every single CRO, every single sponsor has their own model that they feel works the best for them. So you may see kind of a central regulatory CRA who never travels, and they only look at regulatory day in and day out. That's all they focus on, which is still really important, right? So they may not be looking at the data from the protocol, but they're looking at the credentials and the training and the experience of the site staff to ensure that we know that these people are qualified to collect that data.
Wow. Okay. So lots of data that we're talking about, lots of collecting, monitoring the data.
Yep.
Now, where do these CRAs work? Like, who do they work for?
So they're working for contract research organizations or sponsors. Typically, you'll find entry-level CRAs. It's a little bit easier to get in with the CRO just because they tend to hire them very quickly and place them within a sponsor. Sponsors tend to hire from a CRO, from someone who has worked for a CRO, because they understand that that person probably has had a lot of different experiences working for many sponsors in that capacity. If you're lucky enough to land a role with a sponsor right away before the CRO rung, count yourself lucky. Very often sponsors really want to see that experience. Because of how highly regulated this field is, it's kind of a distrusting industry because, again, we're working with human beings and their health. And so we want to ensure that people say who they are matches what they actually do, what they say that they are doing. And so we want to make sure we trust that data. I just lost my train of thought there,
Yeah,
but
no, we want to make sure we trust the data and we trust the people. And I'm getting all these questions coming in. I want to thank you for the questions. And a lot of them are, how could I break into this role? Or I've applied to positions and I'm not getting them. And what Jeannie's talking about, trust, is so important. How do they know who you are, what your skill set is? How can you build that trust, not just by listing it on a resume, but by doing a little more to connect and network? And that is such an important piece of this puzzle because we live in an age of AI deepfakes. There's so much misinformation everywhere. We have to figure out ways to really connect to people on a human level and build that trust. And that is true for all of these roles. That's how people not only get into the role, but continue to rise in their professions, because in the workplace, they're building trust with the teams they work with, the supervisors, their managers. We do see this role all over the place. Clinical trial manager. What does this mean? Not at the site level, but at these other CRO sponsors. What is a CTM?
So the CTMs I've worked with, they have been really pivotal. They act as a type of project manager. So they are managing all the tasks that need to happen with the data. So they often are overseeing the CRAs and CTAs, so the regulatory and the clinical data. But then they're also working on the back end with the medical writers, because very often, what do we do with all this data? We want to publish it. We want to share with the world what our findings are. So very often, this clinical trial manager is not only working on one project, but several projects at the same time. And it could be the same compound and it could be many different compounds. But they are juggling how do we get all the data in so that we can get it out into a beautiful publication. And that publication could be an abstract, it could be a poster, it could be an actual article within something like a JAMA or other publication. There's usually a strategy within each sponsor and CRO how they go about that publication process. But they are often juggling also the finances of each project and ensuring that we have the right staff in place to accomplish the goals for that year and that multi-years if it's that long of a trial, and that it fits with the goals of the company. So it's all within scope.
Big job. You're working with the data, you're working with budgets, you're working with personnel, you're working with the IP. And it's really important that you have a lot of experience. So maybe you have a great education outside of clinical research. That's a fantastic starting point. You're going to need a lot more experience to be in that clinical trial manager role. We also see these data manager roles. What are exactly do data managers do, Jeannie?
Oh, I love them so much. They make sense of the data, right? So they streamline the data so it's common coding language. They are able to work with the CRAs to hit our certain targets and deadlines for said publications. They heavily rely on excuse me, they heavily rely on the staff, so the CRAs, going out to all the sites, but they also rely on kind of the medical writers. They rely on kind of these medical monitors who are looking at the safety. So they're kind of taking direction on what we need to look at. So very often they will, they have a lot of power in that they will kind of put a pause to a study if we need to. They're the ones who put in those database locks based on publication plans. Sometimes they even have some programming skills. They really love data. Very often, I remind them that this data did belong to a human being. And so sometimes they lose touch that this is data from a human person. And when you bring them back down to earth, they realize, okay, there's more than just the data, more than these visuals and whatnot, but they're able to produce the data into a manner that we understand it. So, and they're able to finesse it so that they can aggregate them. If we're looking at only, if let's just say if we study males and females, well, they can drill it down on males of this age, females of that age, and looking for common criteria to find that common ground to make sense of it.
Beautiful.
So,
I heard this great quote that every piece of data tells a story, and that story is
yes.
related to a human life and is being used to help, advance this medicine and potentially save additional lives. It's really a beautiful thing. The training that we provide is so important, the foundational knowledge, because how you handle the data from the very first touch point, from the source, all the way through the process of going into the computer systems to the data managers is so critically important. And if the data isn't handled properly, it can cause delays, it can cause all kinds of issues. And so really, Jeannie, isn't that one of the foundational principles of clinical research, is just handling this data?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I didn't mention is, data managers were, I kind of use it in the context of like a single point of source. It's called the EDC, electronic data capture, but very often they have to deal with all the other data that comes in. So think about your wearables, think about other pieces of information that comes in from other systems. So they have to find a way to merge all of that data so that all makes sense and they're all speaking in the same code so that we, on the other end, reading this publication, we can get that final output. So very important. We all work on those, on the data on some level, but these guys, the data managers, they work on them all day, every day. And so I love that you have project manager up here. I mentioned earlier that CTMs are often the project manager, and in some companies, they are distinguished as two completely different roles. And so in this context, if you have a CTM and you have a project manager, very often a CTM manages a single protocol, and then you may have a project manager that manages many protocols. So very similar functions. I think the project managers that I've come across with often look at strategy, and they look at long-term vision for the company and how to move that compound forward or to halt it if that is what is warranted.
We have other roles that we could be talking about, but I do want to get to everyone's questions too. Can we briefly talk about like an IRB specialist? What does someone do at the IRB?
You know, I think I'm always so grateful for people who enjoy working at the IRB. So these are people who do so much consulting and advising with sites and with sponsors, and they are taking a project and looking at the ethical aspects of the project. They have a little bit of a component for the scientific merit, but their main goal is to look at the ethics. So in the US, we call it the Institutional Review Board. Outside of the US, it's the Ethics Committee, because that's what it represents, is the ethics. Is it ethical to do this particular study in this location, in this area? And so depending on where the trial is being run at, it may be at an IRB or it may be at this EC, Ethics Committee. And these specialists, they are juggling finding a committee. So typically they will have a committee who's reviewing the study at the ethics and the overarching scientific merit, if there's any value. And so they coordinate these incoming trials and they will ask clarifying questions of sponsors and of sites, how it's going to be conducted in their space. They may ask about future research that may come out of it. And they're always looking from the lens of, is this ethical? I say that I want a pint of blood, and the next month I amend the protocol and I say I want two pints. They may say, hold up, that's too much. we're gonna stop you from this, as they should. So the IRB specialists are kind of a vendor aspect of clinical trials. They kind of hold everyone accountable for the ethical aspect. That's a great place to start to get some experience if you're able to volunteer for an IRB.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really hold the safety of the participants in trial with the highest regard, and that is so important. And the IRB's role is to really ensure that every site is protecting that safety. One more role, and then we're going to get to questions, I promise everyone. Clinical research scientist, that's a whole different role. Do you know what a clinical research scientist does? How can you explain that?
You brought this up for me, David. I've had the pleasure of being a clinical research scientist for about 4 years, and it's very wide encompassing. And I want to kind of note that all of these roles that we've talked about, some of them bleed into each other. So a CRC is kind of an all-encompassing title. Clinical research scientist can be. So I've been in the role of clinical research scientist where I only looked at safety, and so I only looked at what happened to this person, what adverse events. Was it a particular adverse event that I was looking for and expecting, or was it a new one that I wasn't expecting at all? But I've also been in roles where I helped design and write the protocol based on previous phases of that trial, previous lab research that was conducted, maybe some AI and machine learning that gave me data and modeling to write a protocol. Other aspects of clinical research scientists may be writing and assisting with that space of writing the publications. So clinical research scientists, depending on where you work, every company can also define them as a medical monitoring. I'm trying to remember. I'm a medical monitoring associate, where they help the medical monitor, and so that kind of speaks more to the safety aspect. I think that's all I can say for now. I don't know what kinds of questions will come from that.
You've been talking about it for so long because you've been doing it. You've had that role. But the fact of the matter is you've had so many of these roles, Jeannie, and that's why we brought you on to talk about them. And so, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I do want to get to your questions now. We're having some questions that are about how do I break into the industry? Okay, so many of you ask, I've been applying to jobs, and how do I get into the industry? There's people who've said, I've been trying to get a job for over 2 months, and I got interviews. I thought I did great, but I didn't get either of the jobs. So what's going on there? Well, quite frankly, maybe they interviewed several different candidates, right? So when you go to an interview, it's not just one person they interview. They're going to interview several, and they're going to be looking for things like, are you building trust? Do you have the ability to really get the job done and learn the job well? And it's really critical that you go into that interview prepared, ready, not just to show them you can do the job, but you have to be the best you possibly can. One of the reasons why we spend so much time with our students actually practicing the interview questions, preparing them for the interview. We've been doing this for 10 years. Our students come back from the interviews, they tell us the questions they're going to ask, and our colleagues are doing the interviews. They tell us the questions they're going to ask. So we practice with you all of those interview questions. And if you've gotten to the interview, fantastic. Sometimes you need a little extra help to actually get to that next step. So thank you for the question. It's really, really a great question. Oh my gosh, so many more questions. This is a question about the CRC role. Are they involved with phlebotomy, EKG responsibilities, or is that specialized based on location? Can you answer that question for us?
It really is based on the site. I mean, every site is going to operate differently. I think if you don't have that skill set, get that skill set because it can't hurt you. If it's a skill set that you're a little bit shy from, be honest and don't say that you're willing to do it and they're expecting you to do it, but you actually don't want to do it. I think that read the job description. Every site is going to be different. I think someone had mentioned in the questions, is there not one standard CRC job description? There isn't. We are not yet, clinical research as an industry is not yet on the US labor and statistics. I think ACRP is trying to change that, and they've moved some pieces of legislation and had a lot of people signing things to get it moved into that space. Until that happens right now, it's kind of a little bit in the wild, wild west, making up things as we go. This is kind of more recognized as being working in healthcare or research and biotechnology. But until that happens, look at CRC roles and really read it carefully to understand what it requires of you.
All right. Here's a question, and we have a couple questions like this, and thank you. We have so many people asking questions. I love it. This is from someone who was working in the field 10 years ago, and now they loved it back then. Now, they've had a big gap in their resume and they're coming back. So how do I transition back? And I want to take this one, Jeannie, because we have a new program that we're offering, and it's trial ready training. It's a 3-day course to really update you on the latest skills, the latest guidelines from the ICH. It's R3 approved. It's 3 days. And then you can also get career coaching. And having that training and career coaching from us is a great way to get back into the industry for people who have some experience, but just want to get that refresh, plus that career support. We'll help you with your resume, cover letters, and we have some connections too. So great question, and thank you for that. We have another question about certifications recommended. What certifications do you recommend, Jeannie? You're looking for a new hire. What would be something that you might look for?
I think to start off, I like looking for someone who's a lifetime learner, who is willing to learn about a new therapeutic area, be willing to work with a different demographic of patients. So, right now I might be working with the geriatric population, but if you're open to working with pediatrics, I think that would be something that I would be looking for. So when I'm looking at candidates who are applying for positions, I'm scanning for keywords. I'm looking for something that makes you stand out. So if you're applying for that position, I'm expecting you to have that skill set. But what I'm looking for is what soft skill do you have, right? And if you have a certification such as ACRP or within SOCRA, there's a lot of different kinds out there. I'd be curious to see what certification you want to bring. So I think the question was specific to budgeting and contracting. There are some project management certifications out there, and that speaks more to project management. There are some IRB training that you could also attain. It really all depends on where you want to go into the future and how long. I have seen people kind of jump from one certification to the next because that's what they were interested in at that time, or maybe that's what fit for them in that chapter. I don't know if you'll touch on this, David, but having worked for 25 years in research, I have 4 kids, and I've been able to work remotely. I've been able to work part-time because I established myself from the very beginning what I wanted to do, and that was to make human health better. And so I was very diligent because you have to keep in mind, I worked remotely at a time when we didn't have cameras standard on our laptops. So you had to buy your special webcam just to have a meeting with your sponsors and with your sites. And so I was able to figure out how to work in a virtual environment when that wasn't as supportive in the early 2000s. And so it really is, what are you willing to show that you're the kind of person who will get it done no matter what? That's how you can stand out. So I'm looking for a standout person. And that's something that as an instructor, as a director, as a colleague of Clinical Research Fastrack, I think what Fastrack does really well is they're going to give you the hard skills that you might be lacking, but they're really going to be honest with you and help you fine-tune your soft skills to kind of really make you a better candidate in how you phrase what you're saying, and how it's said can be so important because that's how it's going to be taken. So I hope that's helpful.
Beautiful. And I want to show this slide because we see 4 key elements to getting hired. And, first is the training that you need. And someone mentioned that all these jobs often say we want 1 to 3 years of experience, 2 years of experience. But the fact of the matter is we've been training people for nearly 10 years. And we have been helping all of these people with no years of experience get into these roles that are asking for 1 to 3 years of experience. But really what they're asking for is competency, that you can show that you're competent, that you can learn the material quickly, and that you do have some training to bring to the table. It might not be 1 or 2 years of experience, but when you have the core competencies under your belt, when you have that training, and then you've gained some experience, even in our class, which is, filling out the documentation, working with the protocol, performing all the consents, and learning the documentation. Once you have that, you have the foundation that you need to really get started, but it also helps to have some connections. If Jeannie's getting a lot of resumes to review, it's, well, who do I interview? Well, if she's handed a resume from someone she trusts, if she gets a referral through a connection, that's someone that's going to be at the top of the pile and she will take notice of. Doesn't guarantee that you get hired, but it's really going to help you get to those interviews. And then, of course, when you have the support that you need with your resume and cover letters, preparing for the interviews and being really ready to show exactly what Jeannie was talking about, that you're going to get the job done, that you're competent, that you're trustworthy, that you have what it takes. Wow, there is so much that you can do. We're coming close to the end, and I just want to mention we do have an upcoming class in December that is open for enrollment. Please make sure that you take down our phone number and our email. If you call right now, there is nobody at work. Right now, it's late, and we encourage our team to work hard, but also we encourage them to take time off too. And so if you call us tomorrow or next week or email us, it will be a great time for us to answer more of your questions. Before we go, Jeannie, you've been in this field for 25 years. 25 years. What keeps you that long? What do you love about clinical research? What is so special about it?
Oh, there's so much. I think the main thing is the people that I get to work with, because I get to work with the most passionate people who care about human health, who care about making an indication better. So like right now, I'm working in diagnostics. Never worked in diagnostics. I've worked in a lot of different areas, not diagnostics. And I'm working in neurology, which I had worked in before, but I worked in ALS. Now I'm working in Parkinson's dementia. And the ideas that I get to learn about, to think outside the box, to make better, wouldn't it be great to know that in the future, I will find a way to diagnose dementia before it actually sets in and maybe prevent it? Like, might be selfish, but man, that would be pretty awesome. And I've been able to see some products come to market as a result of my little bit of work in that space. It's a really great feeling to know that it paid off, making someone live a little bit longer or live a lot better so they have a better living on a healthy level. So it's the people, it's the patients, it's the technology. We do work in some of the best tech that there exists in the world because it is a global industry.
Yeah, global industry. We're working for the betterment of people's health. We are helping people add more birthdays and live better quality of life. And that is such a beautiful thing. This really is
Yes.
a wonderful, wonderful industry. And I want to thank you, Jeannie, for spending this time with us. It flew by. I cannot believe 45 minutes can just
Yes.
fly by so quickly. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your schedules and your busy days to attend. It's really wonderful to have so many of you. We hope we could answer some of your questions, but please contact us. You can call us during business hours at 602-883-7944. Email us at contact@clinicalresearchfastrack.com. Go to our website, and we would be happy to answer more of your questions.